We have to hope so.
I think I got you in one slide, but not the other. So if you spoke again, I can only hear one slide.
Well,
that's better. Sorry,
it's probably my fault. But anyway, it's Mr. Millett you need to hear.
Well,
yes, Mr. Millett, when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stokes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. We were in the middle, I think, of talking about evacuation plans. Can we look then back at your letter of the 27th of September 2010 about the meeting that you'd had with Janice Ray on the 24th of September 2010? CST 403061, please. And there's the letter. If you go to page 3, please, and look at the second heading on that page, you can see there's the heading, Personal Emergency Evacuation Plans, or PEEPs. And it says, the suite of personal emergency evacuation plans, PEEPs, documents you showed me, are the ones used as best practice in the HM government guidance documents for risk assessment. So by using these documents, you are following the guidance in the government risk assessment guides and therefore best practice. You explained that the residents' newsletter carries articles asking any resident to contact TMO if they are experiencing any mobility or sensory problems. TMO have recently introduced a comprehensive programme to gather information about residents, including any disabilities and their physical ability and mobility to respond to any emergency situations. This information will be imputed, or I think it was inputted, onto a TEP tracker system and held centrally. The additional information will be used to assess if residents may require additional devices to provide them with early warning of smoke/fire in their home and or development of a personal emergency evacuation plan, PEEPs. Do you recall having that discussion with Janice Ray on the 24th of September 2010?
Yes. Well, I've written this document, so yes, I recall that.
You do?
Obviously.
Did you have a discussion such as that at any other time after the 24th of September 2010?
It doesn't spring to mind if it was a conversation, but it would have been an ongoing.
Now, you say in the letter that Janice Ray showed you a suite of PEEPs documents. Can you explain what PEEPs documents she showed you?
It would be the HM government guide, which is a pinky coloured booklet, and in there is a suite of documents, tick box questions to ask.
I see. So your reference to suite of documents was not ones that had already been filled out by the TMO and used in practice. It was just the template.
It's the templates in those in that booklet.
Right. You go on to say in the third line, second sentence, that by using these documents, you are following the guidance in the government risk assessment guides and therefore best practice. And that's the guide you're referring to, is it? The
yes.
pinky guide. I'm just trying to identify what that is. Was it the sleeping guide?
No, so there's a suite of documents for risk assessment, all the different building types. Then there was another document brought out specifically disabilities.
Right. Let's see if we can identify it rather than guessing. Can we look, please, together at HOM 50550? This is. I'm getting a word in my ear that I've given that is there's a better reference rather than a wrong reference. Can I try another one? INQ 000147332. INQ 000147332. I wrote it down. Right, that is the colour I think you were identifying earlier.
Yes.
Is that? It's called Fire Safety Risk Assessment, endorsed by the Disability Rights Commission. Is that the document you were shown?
Yes.
Were you shown any other document?
From my memory, I can't remember, but this would be the document I would refer to.
I see. Were you told that the TMO would be looking to you to produce PEEPs in accordance with this document?
If I was asked, yes.
You say, if I was asked. What was the conversation? Did Janice Rader say to you, if I ask you, you must produce a PEEP in accordance with this document? Or did she say to you, you must produce a PEEP for whichever people I identify? How did the conversation go?
I can't remember per se, but it would have been along the lines of, could you undertake a PEEP for me if I require you to?
Right. And your understanding was it that she would identify the specific resident in the specific building, in
Yes.
respect of which you would then apply this document?
Yes.
I see. Can we then go back to the letter, please? CST 403061, page 3, in the PEEP section. I read it to you before, but I'll go back to it, where you say that you were told that the residents' newsletter would carry articles asking any resident to contact the TMO if they are experiencing any mobility or sensory problems.
That was my understanding, yes.
Did you ever check that information for yourself?
No.
Why is that?
What did I check that there was any newsletters with that information in?
Did you ever check for yourself that the TMO was providing or publishing articles to its residents in its stock, asking any resident to contact the TMO if they were experiencing any mobility or sensory problems?
No, I never checked up on whether they undertook what they were saying.
Why is that?
Because they would provide me with the information. I'm the risk assessor, not the person who would be coordinating their information gathering.
Was it not part of your job to make sure that your client, the TMO, or our BKC, it matters not which for this purpose, was managing their fire safety in such a way as to impart information to residents that if a resident needed specific assistance because of mobility or sensory problems that they had, that they should contact the TMO?
If I was told that that was in the document, I would believe that it was in the document. Cannot ever remember going through every one of their documents or link magazines to check whether that item or article was in there.
Was it your opinion at the time, or understanding at the time, that that approach was consistent with best practice in accordance with that government guidance document?
I'm going to say yes, because I wouldn't know any other way of them collecting that information.
Now, in the second part I've read to you already, halfway down that text, it says TMO have recently introduced a comprehensive programme to gathering information about residents, including any disabilities and their physical ability and mobility to respond to any emergency situations. What was that comprehensive programme that Ms. Ray told you about?
It would be information I was given by her. The wording would have been, this is what we're doing.
What was your understanding about what that comprehensive programme was or entailed?
Over the years, I've understood it to mean that if information was given to the TMO by a resident, or if the TMO, because of residents asking for other items or equipment or having problems because they couldn't use lifts or staircases, that information would then be collated and given to me if required because it affected their mobility.
But I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what you understood by the comprehensive programme you were told the TMO had recently
It was
introduced.
a computer system, a software system, as far as I was aware.
Right. And what did you understand that the TMO was doing by way of gathering information about residents, including any disabilities?
My understanding was that they had information that was coming in from residents, and they were going on to a central point where it could be accessed via people who had authorization to access that information.
I see. So your understanding was that this comprehensive programme to gathering information was really a repository of information that residents volunteered to the TMO rather than was gathered from the residents by the TMO.
It could be both, I suppose, and also from...
Well, what was your... Sorry, you say it could be both, I suppose. What did you understand? at the
Both,
time?
because their employees, as they walked around the buildings, the caretakers would be their ears and eyes to gather that information as well. So there was different routes for that to come back to the TMO. I was just the recipient, or would have been the recipient of the information once they had collated it and had that information, and I was asked to undertake a PEEP or include it in the risk assessment if required.
And you say in the last line of that paragraph, the information would be inputted on a TP tracker system and held centrally. Did you ever see or check the TP tracker?
No. I would not have access to that.
How often did you understand that that information would be collected and put onto the TP tracker?
I have no idea.
Did she not tell you that?
No.
Did you not ask?
No.
Did you not ask her what the programme entailed in terms of regularity of collection?
Well, I would assume it was ongoing.
Right, but why you made a lot of assumptions. Why did you not want to get to the bottom of precisely what it was that Janice Ray was doing by way of getting the information from residents and putting it into the system? Regularity, who they were approaching, how they were going about it.
It would be beyond what I would expect a fire risk assessor to do.
Given what we've seen in PAS 79,
Yes.
was that was the case? Was it even after 2012?
Yes. I mean, in PAS 79, I believe, 2012, there isn't even a dedicated section for disabled.
And if you look a little bit lower down the paragraph that we're still looking at, it says the additional information will be used to assess if residents may require additional devices to provide them with early warning of smoke, stroke, fire in their home and or development of a personal emergency evacuation plan. Did you understand, well, who did you understand would carry out that assessment?
Occupational health. Within the TMO.
Occupational health isn't a who, it's a
They're
Who?
whoever they employed to undertake. So can I go back a stage there?
Yes, please.
So there was more than once. One was to provide standalone sprinkler systems for heavy smokers, which was run by LFB, and I know that the TMO then put in a bid for money for these systems. They had systems in place where if deaf people, they could have flashing beacons installed in houses or flats. So these I knew there was the existence of these items of equipment, systems, and someone was actually looking at all this, and more than once Janice actually spoke to me and said, what do you think of this device, or can this be used by this sort of person? So I knew this was ongoing.
Yes. Who was it who would assess whether a particular resident might need a PEEP?
TMO to start with, and then if one was required and I had undertaken a few for the TMO, I would have been asked, could I undertake this one?
So the TMO would identify who would need a PEEP, and then who would carry out the PEEP, who would actually develop it, using the word in the letter.
I would if I was asked to do so.
Right, I see. Apart from what you were told in this meeting, did you ever see this system, so to speak, in action?
No.
Between your meeting on the 24th of September 2010 and the fire at Grenfell Tower on the 14th of June 2017, did you ever seek any further information from Janice Ray or anybody else at the TMO about how the TMO would carry out its obligations in respect of gathering information on vulnerable residents?
No, it was my assessment. It was ongoing. They would inform me if there was any issues, and I would then include them in the FRA.
Right. Were you ever asked for advice about how the TMO should carry out their obligations on this particular subject?
No.
Now, as I think we've established already, the information that you've set out in your letter here was information that you obtained from Janice Ray before the commencement of your medium risk FRA programme.
Yes.
Because you started that in the October of 2010, didn't you? Following month.
Yes.
Is it right that that information would then be applied generally to all of your fire risk assessments?
Yes, that's what this letter was about, to actually get some baselines to include items all the items on the page 1 in that list.
I think it's right that at this point, namely September 2010, Grenfell Tower was not considered specifically because it wasn't part of the medium risk programme, was it? It was a high risk building.
That would be correct, but
Yeah. Can we please have up on the screen your FRA for Grenfell Tower of the 29th of December 2010, which is the first that you did for Grenfell Tower once you had become contracted outside Salvus.
okay.
And look, it's CST 403181, and I'd like to go in it, please, to page 16. And this is section 13 at the top of your screen, top of the page. Disabled people. It is considered, and although it's a question, it is considered that the building is provided with reasonable arrangements for means of escape for disabled people. Tick yes. You see that? And then the text in the box says this. At the time of the risk assessment, there was no evidence of any resident within the premises who suffers from sensory impairment that would prevent them from hearing a shouted warning of fire. TMO have recently introduced a comprehensive programme to gathering information about tenants, including any disabilities and their physical ability and mobility, to respond to any emergency situations. This information will be inputted on a TP tracker system and held centrally. The additional information will be used to assess if residents may require additional devices to provide them with early warning of smoke stroke fire in their homes and or development of a personal emergency evacuation plan, PEEPs. Both the lifts in this building are evacuation stroke firefighting lifts and could be used in the evacuation of any disabled residents from the building. Now, do you agree that apart from the first sentence, the information that you've included in that text is exactly the same as what you wrote in your letter of the 27th of September 2010 that we've just looked at?
Correct.
Including the typo for inputted?
Yes.
Yes. So it's a cut and paste?
Yes.
Yeah. Even though at that meeting, as you've told us, you were only considering medium risk FRAs or FRAs for medium risk buildings, weren't you?
But on that letter, there is also what it went into the lifts, which was for over 18 metres in height, which would be high-rise buildings. So that whole thing, that letter would have been for all their buildings.
Regardless of the risk level?
Height level, you mean?
Well, no, let's be clear. Medium risk was the programme...
Sorry, I was wrong. Definition of risk you were talking about.
Yes. So, just to back up a little bit, even though at the meeting of the 24th of September, as captured in your letter of the 27th of September 2010, you were only looking at that stage at doing FRAs on medium risk buildings.
But I was looking at... The letter was for looking in future, because the lifts would have been for high-rise buildings over 18 metres high. So I'm going to say the letter includes all buildings.
You're right. So I follow. So even though at that stage you were only discussing the medium risk programme because that is the tender that you had just won, nonetheless you say that your letter in fact comprehended buildings in all levels of risk.
Yes.
I see. Did you have any discussion at that meeting about whether the information that you were being given would be applied to all buildings regardless of risk level?
Yes.
Why was that, given that you'd only tendered for the medium risk programme?
Because I could be asked to go to any building at any time. That was the contract. The contract was, yes, it was the medium risk, but my understanding was if I was asked to go to any other building, I could. And this is 2010, and I was going to Grenfell.
Well, indeed. But that was before. I thought we'd established before that was before you were essentially opened up for all buildings without a tender.
I was future-proofing the document, if you want to call it that. I was looking at everything that could be used in the future.
Right. Now, when you wrote what you wrote in this text here, clearly it's not specific to Grenfell Tower, is it?
No.
No. And you hadn't checked the TP tracker, had you?
No.
No. Or established if any residents had or should have a PEEP?
That would be information given to me.
You hadn't established if any residents should have or had a PEEP, correct?
I had not asked specifically, but my understanding was ongoing, they would tell me as the risk assessor if any had in the building had a PEEP.
Well, when you say at the time of the risk assessment, as you do there was no evidence of any resident within the premises who suffers from sensory impairment. When you say there was no evidence, what evidence had you looked for?
None was given to me.
No. What evidence had you looked for?
None was. I hadn't looked for it. None was given to. I asked the question there to give to me, not for me to interrogate their systems.
Why didn't you write, at the time of the risk assessment, I have not been instructed that there was any resident?
I don't know. That was the words that were written at the time between myself and Janice.
Right. It may be a lawyer's distinction, some might think it is, but do you realise that there was a distinction between stating that you had not been told something on the one hand and stating that there was no evidence of it on the other?
If there is a distinction, it's...
It eluded you?
Yes.
Right. So really, what you were saying in the first sentence was an assumption.
I was given no documentation, no evidence to say there was anyone in the building.
Indeed. And therefore you assumed that there was nobody who needed a PEEP.
Yes.
Yes. Now, why did you focus only on people who suffered from sensory impairments that would prevent them from hearing a shouted warning of fire? In other words, someone with a hearing impairment. Why not other disabilities, such as mobility or visual impairment?
Because in this particular case, there's no communal fire alarm system. So the only time that they would actually, it would be a hearing problem if they were trying someone to knock on the door and someone was shouting fire.
Well, that's quite a narrow interpretation of disability, isn't it?
Yeah. This here is 2010, but don't the later ones expand out to include hearing and sensory loss?
Well, we'll look at the later ones in a moment.
So these evolved over time?
Well, we'll see how they evolved over time, but just at this time, why did you limit your the scope of disability to those people with hearing impairment, as opposed to visual impairment, mobility impairments, mental health impairments?
Cannot give you a comprehensive answer, but the disability one, mobility would be covered in, and physical ability is covered in the next sentence. TMO would inform me if they had anyone with any of those problems in the building.
Did you ask, I take it you didn't ask Janice Ray the question, is there anybody in this building who is disabled?
I would expect them to tell me.
Yeah, when you say this information will be inputted on a TP tracker system, can you explain why you didn't check the TP tracker system yourself to make sure that there truly was no evidence of any resident within the premises suffering from a sensory impairment to their ears?
Well, I'm not an employee of the TMO. I was a contractor. I couldn't just walk into their building and say, can I look at your systems?
But you could ask them.
I would have asked as part of an ongoing and expect them to tell me if they knew of anyone as well. And I expect if Janice knew anyone, she would tell me as well.
When you were preparing this, you identified the system on which the information would be inputted. Did you not ask Janice Ray, Janice, please will you go to your TP tracker system and tell me from it who, as at today, is a disabled person for the purposes of my FRA? Did you ask her that question?
No.
Why not?
Because it would be, the onus would be on the occupier or the responsible person to tell the risk assessor that information.
Is that not a very incurious approach for a fire risk assessor?
No, I don't think so.
So was your approach quite simply to assume that there were no disabled people in the building, regardless of there being a system whereby you could find out, or you could be told from it who they were, until you were actually told expressly in terms?
But I believe that's the criteria that's used in PAS 79, where in a general needs block of flats, it's very hard to find out if anyone has got disabilities. It's the landlord or the tenant management organisation or the managers, agents of the building would have that information, not the risk assessor.
No, indeed. And the risk assessor isn't, I take your point, required necessarily to collect it at source. But what would be the point of having a section in your fire risk assessment for disabled people unless you could contemplate reasonably that you might be given it?
Well, it was an ongoing, I would be asked these questions, and it was ongoing, and well, in my view, I would expect that they would tell me if they had anyone like that, because it's the onus is on them as the responsible person to tell me, the risk assessor, of information they have on this topic and subject.
Do you remember any occasion over the 6 years you did FRAs, 7 years you did FRAs for Grenfell Tower, being told of anybody who had any kind of disability in the building which might warrant your referring to it in your FRA, or for whom a PEEP should be prepared?
In Grenfell?
Yes.
I cannot remember for Grenfell per se. Other buildings, yes. And as I alluded to earlier on, after going around the building in November 16, after my last FRA, I saw a mobility scooter and then asked the question about mobility of that person in that flat.
Yeah, we'll come to that. Did it never strike you as strange that in all those years you'd never been given any information about anybody with any disability of any kind for whom reasonable arrangements for means of escape might be required?
For that building, no, because other buildings I was given that information. So therefore, I rely on the TMO to give me that information as they had for other buildings.
I see. Let's go to your FRA completed on the 20th of November 2012 next. CST 403084, page 20, section 13 again. And what we're going to do is we're going to trace the same section through the years. So I'll take this quite quickly because we can. Same text. CST 403084, page 20. Towards the bottom of your screen, same text in the box, same tick yes, same text in the box, except after the words in the third line, shouted warning of fire, or a loud knocking on their entrance door to warn them. And then it goes on, TMO have recently introduced a comprehensive programme, etc., and next sentence, this information will be imputed, meaning inputted on the TP tracker system, etc. So cut and pasted again, except for the words, or a loud knocking on their entrance door to warn them.
So it's not a full cut and paste, it's been
Indeed.
Amended.
Yeah, why did you amend it to add that?
Because a knocking on, it would be, as the document evolved, shouted warning or knocking on the door, because obviously that was missing in the first one.
Well, right, well, I can understand the difference in one sense between a shouted warning of fire or loud knocking on the entrance door. What was it that prompted you to add those words in this 2012 FRA?
I can't give you a specific, but if it's changed on this one, it would have been changed on all of them because of a incident that's happened or information that came to light that I'd missed it on the first one.
Right, and then looking at the 2014 FRA, CST 403157, page 21. This one is identical to the November 2012 text, isn't it? Including the typo for inputted again.
They're slightly different again. This has been, so the last paragraph, there's more information added. These are live documents where information is added as and when it comes to light.
Yes, I take your point on the last 4 lines, but the rest of it is essentially cut and paste, isn't it, from the 2012?
Because nothing has changed, so therefore it is reasonable to accept that it is the same information, yes.
Yes. And you didn't even really reread it in order to cure the typographical error, did you?
To be honest, if it hadn't come up as spell checker, I wouldn't have looked at it, no.
Right. Well, that may explain a number of the infelicities which are repeated. But going to the 2016, April 16 FRA, CST 403161, page 22. Same section again, same question, same tick, same text, except that at the end of the first paragraph, we can see a shouted warning of fire, but no reference now to the loud knock. The sentence has now reverted back to the December 2010 version without the loud door knocking addition. Why was that?
I can't answer that, don't know.
Did you just cut and paste the wrong document, do you think?
No, because if I'd have cut and pasted it, it'd been the previous one. So no, I can't answer that question. But there is additional information now at the bottom.
And if we go to the June 2016 version, CST 403145, that's the first page at page 1. If we can go please in that to page 23, bottom of page 23, we can see the start of section 13, disabled people. And again, the first paragraph there ends, shouted warning of fire, no loud door knock. Again, why was that? Why had that reverted back to the 2010 version?
No answer, sorry.
But apart from that and well, let's go to the next page. Can we just turn over as well to page 24? That's the same as the previous, isn't it?
Yes, I'm going to say so, yeah, in training the staff, yeah.
Yes. So, looking at all of those, we've looked at every one up to June 2016. In every FRA you did for Grenfell Tower, after September 2010 and your discussion as reflected in your 27th of September 2010 letter, do you accept that you used the same information about residents in the tower that you'd used in your first FRA in December 2010?
Similar information, yes.
Yeah. You'd taken that information from the meeting that you'd had with Janice Ray in September 2010?
Yes.
Even though that meeting had nothing to do with Grenfell Tower specifically?
Across their portfolio of buildings, that was a general meeting.
And you never updated that information by reference to any particular people or particular system?
As far as I'm aware, the system was still the tracker system, and no information had been given to me to warrant changing it, because there was no information given to me that there was any disabled people in the building that would need a PEEP.
And it never struck you as strange that not once in the 7 years you were doing FRAs in respect to Grenfell Tower, Janice Ray had never identified anybody who might need assistance in the event of a fire?
No, because other buildings she had identified other people in other buildings. So why would this building be any different? If there was someone, she would have identified them to me.
On the basis that you hadn't inquired about whether there were people with disabilities, in the very broad sense, that PAS 79 from August 2012 identifies, on what basis could you reasonably conclude that adequate provisions were in place to protect those people in the event of a fire?
PAS 7912 is a broad document that predominantly covers workplaces.
If you hadn't inquired about those people with disabilities in Grenfell Tower, on what possible basis could you have concluded reasonably that there were adequate provisions in place to protect such people in the event of a fire?
Because I did inquire, because I wasn't given positive information to say there was anyone in there that did require.
With great respect, Mr. Stokes, that answer makes no sense. Because I did inquire, because I wasn't given positive information. That's not an inquiry, is it?
Information was given to me on other buildings where people required assistance or PEEPs to be undertaken, or even broadening it out to hoarding. I was under, well, nothing was given to me reference Grenfell Tower, so therefore my assumption is that there was no one in Grenfell Tower that needed the extra assistance.
You agreed with me earlier that you, under PAS 79, were required, under the guidance, to identify occupants especially at risk in the event of a fire, which included disabled occupants. Do you accept that you failed to carry out your obligations under the Fire Safety Order 2005 and the guidance in PAS 79 in identifying such residents?
No, I don't.
And that by relying merely on whether or not you were provided by Miss Ray, you were not doing your job under that enactment or the guidance?
By relying on Miss Ray, I was under PAS 79 is guidance. I was relying on the TMO to provide me that information. I asked the question at the beginning, and the TMO, if they had that information, would have given it to me.
Now, let's just examine what you say about the TP tracker a little bit more closely, because you deal with this in your second statement. Can we go to that, please? CST 3030186, at paragraph 143 on page 38. We've looked at this section of your second statement before, and at paragraph 143, we've also looked at that before, and you've identified the fact that you were told by Ms. Ray that the TMO had a, quotes, comprehensive programme to gather information about tenants, and that's a quotation from the letter we've seen. Does this mean that you... I'm so sorry, I should go on. You say in the bottom part of that paragraph, whilst I was told by Ms. Ray that the TP tracker system was in existence in relation to individual residents, I was not asked to review or consider it. Does that tell us that you never asked her to see it?
Yes.
And just we covered this a moment ago, but forgive me for going over it again. Why did you not review or consider the TP tracker, just to see what it said on it?
Because my view would be it was outside the remit of the fire safety order, or what I was asked to do as a risk assessor. I wouldn't ask to see the software system that was holding information on, or how it was held on information on the dry riser, as long as I had the information available to me, i.e. given to me. I wouldn't want to see the software the same as I wouldn't want to see what was wrong with your software this morning and why it didn't work.
But you knew it contained relevant information about occupants' disabilities, didn't you?
That's what I was told.
Yes. So why didn't you ask to see the tracker in order to look at that information, in order to see whether there was any evidence for the purposes of the particular building?
Well, if I asked if there was anyone in the building and it was relevant, and I was told not given any information, why would I then want to inspect something where Janice Ray, as a person, had told me there wasn't, if she didn't know?
But would it not have helped you in your risk assessment, filling out the part you're filling out, and knowing that there is a source of evidence, just to ask her whether you can go to that source of evidence and see for yourself, as an independent fire risk assessor, what that source of evidence told you about the building for which you were doing a fire risk assessment?
But I would rely on them to give me that information. I wouldn't be or privy to any medical information that was on that system. And would they want me to look at any medical information on that system? If I was told that this person was in a wheelchair, and could I assess by undertaking a PEEP, I would go and do that. It's not for me as the risk assessor to manage their system for them.
I'm not suggesting that it's for you to manage their system. I am suggesting to you that it was your responsibility to collect data for the purposes of your fire risk assessor from the source, whether by asking for it interpolated by Janice Ray or by taking it directly from the TP tracker, to which you refer repeatedly.
And I would have went to the person and asked, is there any information? Or that was a given, that I would be given the information if there was any to give to me.
So do you say you did ask her and was told there was nothing?
Well, at the beginning, the letter, they would tell me if there was any information to be given to me.
Did you know that the subscription held by the TMO for the TP tracker was not renewed after it expired in September 2013.
No,
No one told you that?
no.
Does that explain why you continue to make reference to it in your FRAs in October 2014, April 2016 and June 2016?
Yes, if I wasn't told it wasn't available, I wouldn't have known not to take it out.
Well, I was going to ask you, is that something that you would have expected to have been told?
And if I would have been told that, I would have said, well, what system have you got in place now to maintain information on people in the building?
Did Janice Ray never come back to you and say, the reference to TP tracker is now outdated, we're no longer...
I would have taken it out if I'd have known that.
Now, you say also in your second statement, and we can see it on the page, if we can just scroll up a little, we can see the whole thing, para 142 at the top, that you were not required to carry out any personal emergency evacuation plans, PEEPs, in relation to the tower as a matter of course, but would, if specifically requested to do so. In fact, my records show that I only carried out 2 PEEPs for the KC TMO in spring 2014, Markland House and Gilray House. My understanding was that Ms Ray's team generally carried out PEEPs in respect of the TMO's housing stock. So is it right that in the entire time that you were the fire risk assessor for the TMO, and the whole of its stock, you were only ever asked to carry out 2 PEEPs?
That's, if I've put that down, that's my records, that's what I would have, yes.
Apart from the 2 instances you identified, were you given any other information about any other disabled person in occupation in any other building?
General needs or sheltered housing?
General needs.
The answer would be no.
No.
Well, unless it was relevant to what I needed to know.
So help me with this. Leave aside sheltered housing. Is it your evidence that in the 7 years you were the fire risk assessor for the TMO stock, you were only told of 2 instances of disabled occupants?
Yes.
There must have come a time when you were struck by that.
No, I wouldn't know what the state or the abilities of people within their buildings were.
Well, how many properties were there in the TMO stock, on average, over the 7 years you were its fire risk assessor?
Total buildings?
Yes.
I've got no idea. I would have a guess at 400, 500.
There's more than that, almost 10,000, in fact.
Is that is that
I think
dwellings?
we might need to distinguish between units and buildings.
All right. Leaving aside the figures, because I can't give you a precise number, I won't debate it with you. Did there not come a time when it occurred to you that it was very odd that Janice Ray had given you no information about any disabled person for the purposes of Section 13 of your fire risk assessments, other than the 2 instances we see at paragraph 142 of your second witness statement?
No, I would have. It would have been a general item. We would have asked for it if we had meetings, and it never came up. The fire service would have looked at these documents and risk assessments as well, and they've never raised it. And Janice Ray's never helped me or come to me with any information either, nor anyone else in the TM I might add.
You mentioned the mobility scooter, I think, twice in your evidence. Let's look at that. I said I'd come back to it. Can we look, please, at CST 402175? This is a letter you wrote to Janice Ray on the 19th of October 2016. So this is after the last FRA you did for Grenfell Tower before the fire in June 2017. And the subject is Grenfell Tower itself. You see that? Yes. And if you go, please, in this letter to page 12, you can see there under item 1, under my comments, are the caretaker's checks being undertaken and recorded. Additional items as a result of my visit are, 1, there is a mobility scooter being parked and charged on the landing area outside flat 9, and then there's a photograph of the scooter with a cable running through into the front door, and it says underneath that, in bold, the charging of mobility scooters must not be undertaken in the common parts of building. This practice must stop immediately. Flat 9 was on the 3rd floor, wasn't it?
Correct.
A mobility scooter is a good indicator, isn't it, of a resident whose physical state may impair their ability to respond to a fire? Yes? Yes. Did you consider whether the resident of flat 9 needed to be assessed for a PEEP?
I would probably yes.
If that is so, why did you not include in your letter a proposal for an assessment for a PEEP?
Because this particular letter here was to do with going round the common parts of the building before an audit by the fire service. I would have discussed that as a separate issue with Miss Ray.
Did you?
I'm going to say yes, because I definitely would have not let this go without asking about a PEEP later.
Well, you say you wouldn't have done. Do you actually recall having a conversation with Janice Ray about the occupant of flat 9 being appropriate for a PEEP?
I'm going to say yes, because I would not have left, well, the mobility scooter is a giveaway to say that they would have mobility problems. I'm going to say the questions would have been along the lines of, who put a person with a mobility scooter on the 3rd floor of a tower block? How did they get it up here? What's it doing being parked there?
Well, what's it doing being parked there, I can understand. That's obvious. What I'm really seeking to understand is whether you really did have a discussion with Janice Ray about a PEEP, having been alerted to the need for one.
I would have done, yes, because I wouldn't have walked away or wouldn't have gone back and not had a discussion with that there.
Right. I don't think you've touched on that in your witness statement, have you? Any of your witness statements, or have you?
I've no idea. I can't remember. Sorry.
No, we will check. Did you? Well, you, I think, were aware that 9 new flats in Grenfell Tower had been created by the refurbishment on the lower floors.
Yes.
Yeah. Were you aware that some of those flats had been expressly adapted for disabled residents?
Only because of the way the layout of the internal smoke detectors in the flats, yes.
Right. So, do I take it from that you weren't actually told this by Janice Ray, you worked it out for yourself? Were you aware that residents had moved in by the time of the fire?
Only when I walked around there and saw these. I don't think all the flats were occupied.
Right.
But I was not told of occupancy, people moving in, no.
Were you aware that at least one resident in each of those flats had some degree of mobility impairment?
No.
You weren't. Would you have expected to have been told that?
Yes.
Yes. By whom?
Miss Ray.
Right. Now, I asked you earlier on if the information included in the 27th of September 2010 letter was meant to apply more generally to all of your fire risk assessments, and broadly speaking, your answer is yes, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. In respect of your fire risk assessment for other TMO properties, do you agree that when it came to considering and recording disabled people in Section 13 of your risk assessments, you adopted the same approach as you did for the Grenfell Tower fire risk assessments, as we've seen?
Yes.
Yes. Let's just look at one or two of the others deemed by the TMO to be high risk and which were also high-rise buildings. Given your answer, yes, we can take this quite quickly. First, the Adair Tower fire risk assessment, 28th of October 2011. I don't think we've looked at this one before. CST 404307, page 15. Disabled people, bottom of the screen, section 13, same question, tick. And then the familiar words, I think now. At the time of the risk assessment, there was no evidence of any resident within the premises who suffers from sensory impairment that would prevent them from hearing a shouted warning of fire. No loud door knock there. TMO have recently introduced a comprehensive programme to gathering information about tenants, etc., and you can read what's in the box there. And then over the page, please, to page 16, at the top of the page, additional information will be used to assess if the residents may require additional devices to provide them with early warning of smoke, fire in their home, and or development of a personal emergency evacuation plan, PEEPs, and then lifts you refer to. It's a straight cut and paste, isn't it? including the typo if imputed.
No, it's not straight cut and paste because each building would be different, because in some buildings both lifts would be, and other buildings maybe one only.
This is the same text, though, including
Because the
typo.
building's similar in design and layout.
Yes, so it's a straight cut and paste, including the typographical error that you'd used in the Grenfell Tower risk assessment in December 2010.
Agreed.
Yes. Gilray House is another one. This time it's the next year, 19th of November 2012, TMO 00854 page 18. Section 13. Again, TMO 00854 and you can see the date of that. 19th of November 2012. Bottom of page 18. Disabled people, same question, same tick, same text in the box at the bottom, except that here now we've got the loud knocking again, which has come in. And then if you turn to page 19, you see the same text in the next two sentences as we've seen before. And in the next paragraph, the same, and then you've got something about the lifts. You see that?
Which is different.
But leaving aside the lifts, another straight cut and paste, including the imputed.
Well, it's not a straight cut and paste, is it? Because it is different, because the lifts in this building are different, and therefore it's been looked at, and the information is similar because the building is similar, the management information is similar. I have been given no...
All right. It's cut and paste. I mean, humour me. It's cut and paste down to the word PEEPs in the middle of that box, isn't it?
Because the information is the same, yes.
Yes. All right. Now, it's right, in fact, that you had written a PEEP for a resident of Gilray House, as you said in your second statement at paragraph 142, on the 18th of October 2010, hadn't you?
Yes.
I mean, that's not a... I don't want to ask you to guess. This is CST 405610, please. And this is one of the two PEEPs that you referred to in your second statement. Can we just see that? Have it up on the screen. CST 405610. There it is. And it's dated 18th of October 2010, which I think is the first day you started under contract for the TMO, wasn't it?
Yeah, if you say so, yes.
Yes. And the address is Gilray House, and there's a description of the building, present evacuation procedures for the building, if you just go down the screen, and then onto the next page you can see page 2, personal information, what it is that the occupant suffers from, quite a lot of detail there. I'm not going to read it out. And then personal disability or vulnerability when the condition affects her, physical, sensory, and other. And there's a lot of detail about personal abilities. Has the evacuation procedure been explained to her? In this case, her mother, yes. Can the person evacuate the dwelling without help? And there's quite a lot of detail about that. And it goes on at some length. And then on page 3, about the procedure, with an attachment for a plan if required, communication of information, at the bottom of page 3, and then on page 4, change to your condition, and then dates for review, reasons for review, compiler, etc. Now, when you came to do your fire risk assessment that we've been looking at for Gilray House, did you check to see if this resident, for whom you had done a PEEP 2 years previously, was still in residence at Gilray House?
From the top of my head, I can't answer that question because I can't remember.
Right. What ought you have done, given that there had been a resident with a PEEP in that building?
Included it into the risk assessment.
Indeed, and we see nothing in the risk assessment about that person, do we?
Have they moved out?
Well, that is my question to you.
Well, I would have asked that question because this should have been reviewed a year later.
Indeed. And was it? We see no documentary evidence that it was, and see nothing in your witness statement that it was. What happened?
I can't comment.
Hazelwood Tower, 20th of February 2014 FRA, TMO 1004380, please. Page 20. Page 20, please. Thank you. Bottom of the page, disabled people, same question, same tick, same comments in the box. We've got the loud knocking adjunct there. Next page, please. Page 21. TMO recently introduced, etc. So down to the reference to lifts after the PEEPs at the end of the sentence, in the middle of the text. Down to that point, straight cut and paste again. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Markland House, 21st January 2016, TMO 100471159, page 21. TMO 100471159, page 21. Top of the screen, disabled people, same question, same tick. Down to PEEPs, cut and paste. Yes?
Slightly different at the bottom of reference to lifts.
Yes, I know. But down to PEEPs, cut and paste. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. In the case of Markland House, though, again, as we've seen from your second witness statement, you had compiled a PEEP for this building on the 8th of March 2014, hadn't you?
Yes.
We don't need to go to it. We can. The reference is CST 30200896, but I think you accept that because you referred to it in your statement. Did you ask Janice Ray or anybody else at the TMO if that resident was still living in the building in 2016?
Well, I'm going to say I would have done because there would have been a review date on their PEEPs, and therefore, if I hadn't gone back, I would have asked, was the person still there?
Well, let's look at the PEEP then. We can look at it. CST 30200896. Let's look at and see the review date in it. The PEEP is dated the 8th of March 2014. And you can see that from the top right-hand corner of your screen. The review date is on the same page, but 1st of April 2015. Yes. As you can see there,
yep.
I would recommend a review date of 1st of April 2015.
Yes.
Yes. And the Markland House FRA is dated 21st of January 2016, so that not long afterwards, so 9 months or so. Do you remember whether there was a review?
I don't know.
You probably don't remember, but if there had been a review, why not record the fact in the FRA?
Well, did I not say in here, sorry, I'm trying to do this from memory, that the person should be moved at the bottom?
Well, I'm not going to stand here and read it to check.
No, I was just thinking.
To be able to answer your question, but
So if my recommendation would they would have been moved, had they been moved at the time I undertook the FRA?
Well, I mean, you only did 2.
Yes.
Do you not? You don't remember?
No.
If they had been moved, even if they had been moved, why would that not be something that you would put in your FRA?
I can't answer that question.
At Trellick Tower. Well, let me, before I go to that, do you actually recall asking Janice Ray whether or not that disabled person for whom you'd done a PEEP was still resident in the building as at the 21st of January 2016?
Top of my head, no. I can't remember.
Trellick Tower, 26th of April 2017. We've looked at this before. TMO 00842 Page 24. Again, section 13, bottom of the page, disabled people, same question, same tick, same text as we see on page 24. This time you've got the loud door knock addition to the sentence. We didn't have that in the last one. And again, it's the same paragraph. If you go to page 25, you'll see the rest of it. Down to the word PEEPs and a little excursus on the lifts, but down to the word PEEPs and the bit about the lifts, again, straight cut and paste from all the other FRAs we've seen, with the exception or not with the exception of the loud door knock addition to the first sentence. Yes?
And the lifts, yes. Lifts are different in each one.
Well, lifts may or may not be different on each one. Some of the lift parts are similar as well, and we'll come back to lifts in due course. It's right to say, just looking at the survey we've done, that you adopted the same approach across all of your fire risk assessments for the TMO.
Yes.
Yes. So in all of the fire risk assessments you did for the TMO between 2010 and 2017, Mr. Stokes, you never identified and considered disabled residents or occupants especially at risk, except in those 2 cases where you happened to do PEEPs, but even then they weren't reflected in the FRAs for whatever reason.
Correct.
Yes. Can we take it from that you never yourself considered how any of the disabled residents in the TMO's properties for which you did FRAs would be protected and able to escape in the event of a fire?
I did undertake that, yes. I undertook... So, could you ask your question again, please?
You never considered how any of the disabled residents in any of the TMO properties for which you did FRAs would be able to escape in the event of a fire?
I considered it where I was told there was disabled residents.
And those number 2 occasions?
Yes.
That's it?
I was not told of any other disabled residents that
would
alter my opinion in a general needs block of flats, that there was someone in there with problems that would need additional assistance.
So, Mr. Stokes, would we be right in understanding this, that you are saying that you were told by Janice Ray right at the outset that she would tell you about the presence of any disabled residents?
Correct.
That she told you about 2 disabled residents, and those are the 2 we've seen you did PEEPs for?
Correct.
And that the fact that she had told you of those 2 led you to regard her failure to mention any others as being in effect a statement that there weren't any others?
Correct.
Right, thank you.
Did she tell you that in terms at any time?
That was a given. That's
Well,
the understanding I had.
It's the understanding you have. My question was, did she tell you that in terms?
That was what the letter at the beginning was. I would be told if there was anyone, and that is broadly in compliance with PAS 79, which actually says it's in a general needs block of flats, disabled people, it's for the landlord to inform the risk assessor.
Did you ever say to her, that you would proceed on the basis that there were no disabled people in any of the buildings unless she specifically drew them to your attention on the occasion of your fire risk assessments or FRA reviews?
My assumption was that she would tell me whether we had the conversation that I implied to her, you must tell me. I would not know about that. Oh, I can't remember that conversation like that happening. It is implied on my part that she would tell me if she knew, and she did on 2 occasions, and therefore I assumed that is it.
Now, you say in that answer your assumption was that she would tell me, and you said it's implied on my part she would tell me.
I understood that she would tell me.
That's your understanding.
Yes.
What was there that you could see which led you at the time to be clear in your mind that she knew that you were proceeding on that understanding?
I was never questioned, and all the information, all the risk assessments go back, and she never told me anything was wrong with the statement that was in there. And where they were audited by the fire brigade, they never mentioned anything either. So if they had any additional information.
Now, can I then look at an email in December 2012 involving the LFB, CST 30164416. CST 30164416. You can see that at the second half of the screen, Janice Ray is sending you an email on Monday the 3rd of December 2012. For info received this late Friday, haven't even read it yet, J, and it's an email from Nicholas Cummery of London Fire to her, Janice Ray, and Claire Wise at RBKC and others. Subject, LFB Sprinkler Initiative. You see that?
Yes.
And summarising it, he, Cummery, had requested assistance from Janice Ray to identify vulnerable people in local authority premises who could benefit from automatic fire suppression systems in their building. That's the gist of his request. And if we go up the screen...
So can I stop you there? This is individual systems, not building systems. So this is portable sprinkler systems for smokers, which I alluded to earlier on.
Yes. Well, I'm just taking it from what he said in the first and second sentences. I'll read it to you if you like. It says in the first line, apologies, this should have been sent out earlier. The LFB will be writing to all local authorities to outline the business case for the installation of automatic fire suppression system, AFSS, in premises housing those most at risk from fire and its effects. And he talks about risk factors of the inhabitants. Mm-hmm. And goes on to ask for assistance in identifying suitable vulnerable persons in local authority premises. And he's got a deadline. Now, what I want to focus on is your response back to Janice Ray on the same day, about half an hour later. And you say, thanks for this, Janice. I would say you have nobody that this refers to, because if you had, you would have undertaken a PEEPs for them and implemented any findings which would have included additional fire safety measures. If you identify anybody now, questions like, why were they not included in the building's FRA, spring to mind. A good response, I believe, would be, thank you for this information. If we find anyone in future, we will let you know. And I will pass this on to the person who oversees our list of persons who this may be applicable to. Now, Janice Ray hasn't specifically asked you for any advice in her email, did she?
No.
So do you know why she was forwarding this to you, forwarding Mr. Cummery's email to you?
I would have said I would not have responded unless I had a phone conversation with her about this.
Well, you don't refer to a phone conversation in your email, do you?
No, but I'm just saying that I would not have just sent a letter back like this without having a phone conversation.
Well, there was half an hour between 10:05 when she sent it to you and 10:33 when you responded. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at a half an hour on a Monday morning in December 2012. It's hard to remember, of course, but how confident are you that you would have spoken to her before you sent this document? Was your email to her? You can't be confident, can you?
No, I can't, but I would have thought I would have done, because I wouldn't have responded back to say, well, why have they sent this to you in the first place?
Now, you suggest in your advice that there are no vulnerable persons that this applies to. But by that, were you referring to residents in all TMO managed properties?
I'm going to say yes, because that's what it refers to in here.
Indeed. Were you suggesting that there were no vulnerable residents in any of the TMO's stock?
No, this is to do with sprinkler systems for heavy smokers, I believe.
Well, heavy smokers.
Which would be why you would install a portable sprinkler system, because of people falling asleep, vulnerable people falling asleep while smoking.
All right, well, let's pick them as vulnerable persons. How do you know, how did you know that there were no people with those vulnerabilities?
Because, as it says on here, you would have identified them under the PEEPs process if there had been.
It's actually an odd idea that I never thought of this. Maybe you're right, but is a heavy smoker a disabled person for the purposes of PAS 79 and Section 13 of your FRAs?
Well, they're a vulnerable person because of if they are a heavy smoke. This system here is portable sprinkler systems. It's a system of pipes that you put behind a chair with, I suppose the best way to explain it is like a fire extinguisher on the bottom, and if the detector goes off, it covers the person, the chair, and extinguishes the cigarette.
Mr. Stokes, I'm going to come to the text of Mr. Cumry's email in a moment, but I just want to explore where what you've just said takes us. Are you, let me be clear, are you suggesting that a heavy smoker, and however you determine that, I don't know, is a vulnerable person for the purposes of PAS 79?
It could be, yes, if they've got other underlying issues as well.
Oh, well, no, I mean, you didn't mention that. A heavy smoker who might drop a cigarette down the back of the sofa, did you understand at the time that that was a vulnerable person for the purposes of PAS 79 and therefore Section 13 of each of your FRAs?
If that was just for heavy smoking, no, but they could have underlying other issues as well.
Because I was going to say you couldn't possibly have proceeded on the basis that there were no heavy smokers.
Agreed.
No. So let's then look at the text of the email. I'll read it out, given your qualification to it, or your gloss on it. LFB will be writing to all local authorities to outline the business case for the installation of automatic fire suppression systems, AFSS, in premises housing those most at risk from fire and its effects. As part of this communication, we would like to include a list of 10 suitable premises within each borough, which LFB consider would benefit from installation of AFSS due to risk factors of the inhabitants. Using the attached appendices, I am to assist the LFB borough commanders for H and F and K and C with this identification process. That's Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea. Please could I request your assistance to identify suitable vulnerable persons in local authority premises. My current deadline is 20th of December 2012. Now, all he's asking for is identifying suitable vulnerable persons in local authority premises, where he's talking about the installation of AFSS in premises. So, how did you understand what he meant by vulnerable persons?
Because it's an automatic, mobile automatic suppression system.
Where does it say that?
It's a AFSS.
Automatic fire suppression system. Where's mobile?
That is what my understanding of this letter is.
Right.
And I'm going to say that I would have had the phone call and got that information because that's what I would have responded to.
So was it really your belief, regardless of how widely or how narrowly you define suitable vulnerable persons, was it really your belief that there was not one single vulnerable person, even defined as you define it, in the borough? under the TMO's.
Otherwise, you'd have undertaken a PEEP for them.
Well, great respect, that's circular, isn't it? Because you would only undertake a PEEP if Janice Ray had told you that there was a vulnerable person for whom a PEEP was needed. So were you proceeding on the basis, is this right, that because Janice Ray, by 3rd of December 2012, had not identified a single vulnerable person, there weren't any?
Yes.
Right. In fact, that's wrong, isn't it? Because we know that in 2010, you'd done the Gilray House PEEP.
But they wouldn't want an automatic suppression system.
Why not?
Because an automatic suppression system is normally for heavy smokers or people that have problems and smoke a lot and fall asleep when they have a cigarette.
Now, you go on to say in the next sentence, if you identify anybody now, questions like why were they not included in the building's FRA spring to mind. Why did you say that?
Because it's a risk. Heavy smokers are a risk, the same as a hoarder.
No, sorry. Why did you say, if you identify anybody now, questions like why were they not included in the building's FRA spring to mind? Why did you say that?
Because if she had that information, why wouldn't she have given it to me beforehand?
Were you advising her not to identify anybody now? Because if you did, that would prompt the LFB to ask questions about why they hadn't been identified in your FRAs, Mr. Stokes.
No, because I would be questioning why I hadn't been told before.
Indeed. So why are you telling her, if you identify anybody now? That rather looks like you're advising her not to identify anybody who there might be, because otherwise it might provoke questions on the part of the LFB. Isn't that right?
No, that's the way I read it. I read it as you would have had PEEPs. The high risk, an automatic suppression system is used for heavy smokers, and therefore, why wasn't I informed of this if you knew of anyone that had this problem?
Were you more concerned about questions being asked about the FRAs than in identifying vulnerable residents as the LFB had asked?
No, I was more concerned about, my concern would be about vulnerable residents. If they knew about them, why wasn't this identified before?
I don't understand that answer, because that doesn't tally with what you write in that second line.
Well, if she knows anyone, if she goes back to him now and says, we have these people, why wasn't I informed of that to include into the FRA?
Well, precisely, Mr. Stokes. That's the question.
But I don't know what the follow-up to this is. What does she come back and say? No, we haven't got anyone.
Therefore, why are you advising her with your good response, which was, I believe, thank you for this information. If we find anyone in the future, we will let you know. Why didn't you advise her to identify the suitable vulnerable people as the LFB had asked, make a list of them, and send them to the LFB, and copy you in while you were at it? Why didn't you give her that advice?
I can't answer that question, but my concern would be, well, why haven't I been informed that there's anyone would need this system in their building?
You can't answer that question, Mr. Stokes, but I can suggest an answer, and it lies in the immediately preceding sentence. That if she had actually positively done what Mr. Cummery had asked and identified people who were vulnerable, that would have immediately prompted the question from the LFB, why are they not referred to in your FRAs? That must be right, mustn't it?
No, if that's your take on it, so be it. My response would be, why haven't I been informed to put them in the FRA?
And in the last sentence there, you say you'll pass this on to the person who oversees our list of persons who this may be applicable to. Who is the person, or was the person, overseeing your list of persons?
No, this was response to Janice, wasn't it? I believe a good response, I believe, would be to say, thank you for this information. If we find anyone in the future, we will let you know. And I will pass this on.
I see. And who was that person?
The other person named on this, Claire Wise of RBKC.
Why didn't you just simply advise Miss Ray to do what the London Fire Brigade asked?
Well, that's why I'm saying that I would have asked or had a phone conversation from when I received this to when I wrote the reply.
Wasn't this the opportunity to confirm your assumption that you have been labouring under for 2 years with Miss Ray, namely, if there really were vulnerable residents, however you defined them, living in TMO properties, then now is the time to tell you who they were.
But I would have thought she'd have told me up until that point. As I say, automatic fire suppression systems like this are indicative of heavy smokers.
But so far from continuing to labour under the assumption, you actually told her to keep quiet about it.
No, I didn't.
Mr. Chairman, it's a little bit early, but I'm about to switch topics, and we did start at
Well, we did
1:45.
start early, so
We
I
did.
think that's probably a good time in any event.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Mr. Stokes, it's time we had a short break during the afternoon, so we'll take it now. We'll come back at 3:20, please.
Okay, sir.
All right? And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
So,
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. 3:20, please.
yes.
Would you ask Mr. Stokes to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Stokes, ready
Thank you.
to carry on? Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Lifts, Mr. Stokes. Lifts. Definition of a firefighting lift is the first topic under this main topic heading. Can I ask you please to go to your first statement at page 43, paragraph 124.
You might need the reference for the...
Oh, sorry. Thank you. CST 403063, page 43. And if you look at paragraph 124, at the very foot of that page, under the heading Firefighting Lifts, you say this: in the FRAs, I note that the two lifts at the tower were, quotes, firefighting lifts, unquotes. This was based on confirmation from the KCTMO that this was the case, both when I was first, and if you turn the page, involved with the tower, and subsequently when I was provided lists of the KCTMO buildings which had firefighting lifts. See email 6th June 2012, a copy of which is at the back of the KCTMO's fire safety policy. Now, according to your schedule of certificates attached to your second statement that we looked at yesterday, it's right, isn't it, that you had completed a Fire Protection Association certificate on firefighting lifts on the 27th of June 2005?
One of the topics of that document was firefighting lifts, yes.
Indeed, and that, just for the reference, that's CST 3030155. That's the certificate. We don't need to turn it up. Can we take it that you were aware, therefore, as a result of having done that training and obtained that certificate, that there were a number of features that must be present in a firefighting lift in order for it to meet the applicable standards and for it to be designated as a firefighting lift?
Correct.
And you've set out some of those at paragraph 126 of your statement on the screen as follows: a firefighting lift has various features, e.g. two-way communication devices, minimum car size, dedicated power supply, fireman's control switch, etc. And it goes on. Were you aware that a firefighting lift required, amongst other things, first, an escape hatch?
If it was under the standard of a firefighting lift, yes. EN 82, etc.
So yes, under that standard. A secondary power supply?
Under that standard and that type of lift, yes.
Water protection?
Yes.
Lift control systems?
When you say lift control systems, do you mean external, as in drop key, if you want to call it a drop key switch, or do you mean lift control switches inside the car? Will
you tell me what a firefighting lift required by way of lift control systems?
Well, there's two. One is the external switch, is what I'm thinking you're talking about.
A lift service communication system?
Yes.
Yes. Fire-resistant landing doors?
Yes.
And would you agree that if a firefighting lift does not have all of the features set out in the applicable standards, then it can't be designated as a firefighting lift, as understood in the British Standard, which is BS 5588, Part 5?
That was the oldest standard. That's not a new standard. 55885 is the old standard, superseded, I'm going to say 82, 72, 81 or whatever, about early 2000s.
Well, BS 5588 Part 5 goes back to 1991,
yes.
To be clear. EN 72 is 2003.
Yes. Right.
Well, we'll look at both of those in a moment. Let's just take it in stages then. Can we go to your second statement, page 27, CST 303186, page 27. Paragraph 105 on that page. And you say there, By the time of the refurbishment, an almost identical definition of firefighting lift is found in both ADB2 and the LGA guide. A lift designed to have additional protection, with controls that enable it to be used under the direct control of the fire and rescue service when fighting a fire. A similar definition is provided in BS 9991/2015, and you set it out on the page there. You say that the fire service's ability to control the lift is the primary function of a firefighting lift. Is that how you understood it?
Could you say that again for me, please?
Yes, the primary function. Is it your understanding that the primary function, as you understand it, of a firefighting lift is the fire service's ability to control it?
Well, one of them, yes.
It's one of them, but not the only one.
Yes.
No. Let's just look then at the 1991 standard we started with, BS 5588 Part 5, please. And now we'll find that at BSI 50797 at page 26. And I'd like to look with you, please, at section 3, subsection 10, under general. And if we look on that page, in the second paragraph, it says this: a firefighting lift, unlike a normal passenger lift, is designed to operate so long as is practicable when there is a fire in parts of the building beyond the confines of the firefighting shaft, as it is used to transport firefighters and their equipment to a floor of their choice. Now that's how that's defined there. If we go then and look at the 2003 standard, BSEN 8172, which is in BSI 401725, please, at page 18. BSI 401725, page 18. Annex A, firefighting concept for high-rise buildings. It's gone, it's back again. And if we look at under A2, second paragraph, fire service personnel faced with the task of firefighting on a floor high above the ground need to be able to reach the fire quickly and safely, taking with them their equipment. Physical safety and lives, their own and the occupants of the building, as well as the preservation of the building and its contents, can well be put at risk by delay. On reaching the fire, firefighters must have sufficient energy left for the arduous and prolonged task of firefighting. And then it goes on, in the third paragraph, the emergency services are therefore dependent on the foresight of designers in providing them with the necessary facilities to operate effectively within the building once they've arrived. This means that in high-rise premises, the provision of a firefighter's lift is essential. A firefighter's lift needs to be readily available and of suitable design for the use of firefighters and remain in use for as long as possible during firefighting operations. It is recognised that it is neither technically nor economically viable to design and provide a lift which is ensured never to fail. However, designers and installers need to be aware that the fire service is operationally highly reliant on the use of the lift. Now, I've shown you both of those principles. And were you aware of, first of all, the 1991 standard and then the 2003 standard we've just been looking at?
Reasonably, yes.
Yes. So do you accept that a firefighting lift is designed with a range of features that make it suitable to assist firefighters in their firefighting operations? That's the point of it.
Yes.
Yes. And bringing the lifts under the control of the fire service is a feature which can assist in fighting a fire, but it's not the primary function of a firefighting lift, is it?
Apart from moving things up and down.
Well, I suppose so, but it's one of a number of important functions and features. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, turning to Grenfell, can we go to your first statement, please? CST 403063, page 43, paragraph 124. You say there, I'll wait for it to come up onto your screen. As I've shown you, the two lifts at Grenfell Tower were firefighting lifts. And I just want to explore how you came to that knowledge. First, can we go to CST 403102, page 1. This is an email from Andrew Furness of Salvus of the 3rd of March 2010, from Janice Ray to Andrew Furness, 3rd of March 2010. You need to go to the bottom of the screen to see it. Can we scroll down, please, to the bottom of the screen? There it is. Janice Ray to Andrew Furness, 3rd March 2010. Andy, further to the discussion at the recent progress meeting, Robin and I, that's Robin Cahalan, or Kalan, as I think it's pronounced, have put together the following information which relates to TMO lifts serving blocks over 18 metres in height. And then she sets out the standards which they meet. And you can see that at the bottom of page 1 and over to the top of page 2, if you look at that, please. You go to page 2, and you can see the features there set out. And if we go then, please, to Mr. Furness's response on page 1 of the email, the top of page 1, the same day, he responds and says, "Hi, Janice, thank you for the information. We will include the following statement in relation to firefighting lifts based upon the details attached. TMOs confirm that lifts servicing the block over 18 metres in height meet the requirements for firefighting lifts as per specification provided by TMO's senior lift engineer." And then there's some more text. Now, you're not copied into this email chain. Do you know how you got hold of it?
I would have been forward, I would have thought, at a later date.
Were you involved in the meeting that took place that Janice Ray refers to?
No.
Now, it looks to us as if that meeting took place on the 23rd of February 2010. Do you think you were told about that meeting?
I wouldn't know too long ago, sorry.
Right, well, let's look at the minutes and see if it helps. SAL 6042. This is a progress meeting on the 23rd of February 2010, entitled Fire Risk Assessments in High Risk Blocks. Janice Ray is present, Andrew Furness is present, Robin Carlan is present. And if you go to item 2, you can see it says lifts, requirements of firefighting lifts, etc. And then it says Robin Carlan, TMO lift engineer, attended for this item. Janice advised that a number of the FRA action plans had raised specific queries in relation to lifts, and these had been referred to Robin, who was seeking confirmation from Salvus that his interpretation of what constitutes a firefighting lift, in quotation marks, is the same as theirs. The specific points from the action plan were as follows, and then it says in the box, 1 is recommended that the TMO confirms if any of the lifts installed in the building are either firefighter or evacuation lifts as required by building regulations, as the building is over 18 metres high. 2, confirmation should be sought that where the lifts installed in the building are either firefighter or evacuation lifts, that they have been subject to maintenance and testing in line with current guidance and British standards. 3, should any installed firefighter or evacuation lifts not be subject to testing in accordance with current British standards and guidance, it is recommended that competent engineers be engaged to undertake such testing. And then it goes on. RC then outline the 3 different classifications of lifts in terms of fire: fireman's lift, firefighting lift, and evacuation lift. After some discussion, the group concluded that most of the borough's lifts meet the majority, but not all, of the criteria which define a firefighting lift. It was agreed that for the purposes of the action plans, JW and RC would document the criteria that TMO lifts do meet. RC clarified that the requirements for lifts below a certain size are less onerous, and so these lifts are less likely to comply with a significant number of these criteria. Now, did Andrew Furness ever explain any of this to you?
No.
Did he never?
I think, sorry, apologies.
No, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say I was looking there. I couldn't see Andrew Furness's name, but I think it's further up, isn't it?
Yes, he was at the meeting. I take it that you then never saw this minute and were never told about this meeting.
From my recollection, no.
Right. Now, let's then move on in 2010 to your letter of the 27th of September, which we've visited a number of times now, CST 403061. And let's go to page 3 in that, please. And I'd like to have that at the same time on the screen as the text of Janice Ray's email of 3rd of March 2010 at CST 403102. So what we're trying to do is put up on the screen the 27th of, yes, we've got that, we've got both. That's excellent, thank you. Now, what we see here is if you look at the text of her email, page 1 at the bottom, we need to scroll up on the right-hand side of the screen, please, to get the full amount of the, yes. So let's just track this through. And what I want to do is on the left-hand side of the screen, if we can have page 3 of that. So we should have page 3 of your letter of the 27th of September and pages 1 and then over to 2 of the 3rd of March 2010 email from Janice Ray. Let's just compare and contrast. So looking at, and we'll go from right to left, looking at Janice Ray's letter of the email of the 3rd of March, minimum car size, 1,100 millimetres wide times 1,400 millimetres deep for 8 persons capacity, 630 kilograms. You see that that's made its way into your 27th of September letter, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And turning the page, if we can please, on the email, right-hand side, can we go to page 2? You see item 2, dedicated power supply serving lift 3-phase. Additionally, ancillary items such as lift alarm, lighting, etc. are also served by their own dedicated power supply. And that's word for word what you've put into your letter. Just pausing here thus far, do you think she gave you this email in order for you to compile your letter to her of the 27th of September 2010?
Was I not given this email before this date?
Well, you asked
I'm sorry, I'm trying to think in my own mind. I'm sure I have been, because I think yes, I'm sure I've seen this email, as in part of this.
You say as in part of this? Part of what?
So the right-hand side one, I apologise.
Right, well, you're not. That's why I put it to you. You're not copied in on it, and there's no evidence we've seen that you were forwarded it. So I'm asking you
At a later,
how you got hold of it.
Apologies, a later date I would have thought.
Right. Okay. No, I mean, let's just continue and see how far we get. Can we please turn to page 4 in the 27th of September letter on the left-hand side of the screen, and continue with the text on the right-hand side. Yes, so 3, looking at the right-hand side, two-way communication on new lifts includes connection to customer service centre, out-of-hours monitoring service when the lift alarm is activated, same as item 3 on the top. And indeed, if you look down, one can make the same point across it. It's essentially a cut and paste, or as near a cut and paste, from the email into the letter. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yes, thank you. Now, am I right in thinking that this was the only information that you were ever given by the TMO about the features that the lifts in TMO stock had?
I was given a list of lifts and which buildings they were in and what their designations were.
You were right about that. But my question was this the only information you were ever given by the TMO about the features that TMO lifts had? The features such as size, dedicated power supply, communications, fireman's control switch.
Without seeing the rest of this email, does it mention there that there is no lift hatch? Because I include that the lifts do not have a lift hatch. You
do say that, and we'll come to the hatch in a moment. Right? My question is, was this the only information that you were ever given by the TMO about the features that TMO lifts had? Or was there other information that you were given?
It doesn't spring to mind, no.
Right, no. So just by looking at this list, is it right that you knew or understood at the time that the TMO lifts in their stock did not have An emergency trapdoor.
Correct.
A secondary power supply.
Correct.
Water protection.
Most lifts, my understanding, so it's not here, but they were, yes.
And she'd given you no detail about lift control systems. It's not in the list, is it?
Well, the lift would have, you would see that physically on the outside of the lift.
Right. Apart from number 4, fireman's control switch fitted, apart from that, no detail about lift control systems.
Well, that to me would be fireman's control switch fitted would be a lift control system.
All right. A fire service communication system, no detail about that.
What do you mean by a fire service communication system?
Well, what do you understand a fire service communication system to be?
Well, in the latest document,
Yes.
it's normally, it can be on every floor, or it can be on the fire services entrance level and top floor where there is a press button control system on the outside of the lift.
Fire resistant landing doors, no information about that.
It's here, it says item 5, fire lift car doors composed of stainless steel not less than 16 SWG, 2 are fire resistant.
Right. But, and that satisfied, did it?
Yes.
Did the absence of the emergency trapdoor, a secondary power supply, and water protection, taking those as the minimum, did that not suggest to you that the lifts were not firefighting lifts?
No, because they would be firefighting lifts under 5588.
Even though they didn't have those 3 features?
Yes.
Did you ever ask or double check with Janice Ray whether those features were present?
Sorry, memory. I had a meeting with the lift engineer and went over some of the items with the lift engineer and we talked through them.
Was that Robin Cahalan?
I'm going to say yes. Because
TM.
I would have known him, Robin, yes.
Right, Robin, yes, all right. I mean, the reason I'm asking you these questions is because Mr. Todd has expressed an opinion about it. Can I show you his report, please? CTA 6011 at page 85. CTA 6011, page 85, paragraph 8.62. CTA 6011, page 85. It's taking a little bit of time, Mr. Stokes. I apologise for that. I don't know why.
Sorry, sir. I'm sorry.
CTA 6011. Movement. Thank you. Right. Now, on that page, paragraph 8.62, middle of the screen, Mr. Todd says, in the middle of that paragraph, Well, I'll read the whole paragraph to you. Nevertheless, it is clear that Mr. Stokes did have some knowledge of the requirements of modern firefighting lift standards. For example, he identified in his FRA that the lift cars at Grenfell Tower were not provided with an escape hatch for use by firefighters trapped in the lift. This feature was not included in the early requirements for firemen's lifts. Accordingly, while in my opinion many fire risk assessors would have overlooked or at least considered it unnecessary to comment on the absence of the trapdoor, this absence and Mr. Stokes' awareness of its absence presented Mr. Stokes with something of a telltale sign that the lifts were not firefighting lifts, though this omission was probably of no major concern to LFB. Would you agree with Mr. Todd's opinion that it was a telltale sign that the lift was not a firefighting lift?
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
Hasn't Mr. Todd had a supplementary document out since this one was written?
Well, can you answer my question, please? Why do you disagree with his opinion?
Because it is a sign that when it's were not firefighting lists. Well, they were firefighting lists to the standard at that time.
So you say, do you, that Mr. Todd is wrong in this part of his opinion?
No, I say that he says that there were a telltale sign that the lifts were not firefighting lifts.
But the absence and your knowledge of the absence of a trapdoor is a telltale sign that the lifts were not firefighting lifts. You say that
to the standard of where the trapdoor would be included, but they were still firefighting lifts to a previous standard.
Well, was that standard a standard that applied at the time you did your fire risk assessments from 2010 onwards?
Yes.
So do you therefore disagree with Mr. Todd that the absence of those trapdoors, escape hatches, was something of a telltale sign that the lifts were not firefighting lifts?
And I acknowledge in my document that the lift hatches were not there, so they weren't to the current standard.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I'm just thinking to just want your evidence as to whether you agree or disagree with Mr. Todd's opinion here.
Well, I disagree that. So he's saying to me that there is an awareness because of the telltale sign that they were not firefighting lifts. That is incorrect. They are firefighting lifts, but to a different standard of the current British standard.
When you say to a different standard of the current British standard, do you mean a standard different from the current?
Yes.
So just to understand what you're saying, are you saying that even though they didn't have an escape hatch, they once would have qualified as firefighting lifts, even though they no longer do under prevailing standards?
Yes.
Right. And the prevailing standards, were those prevailing at the time you did your FRAs or not?
My understanding is yes.
So they would have been a telltale sign that the lifts, although firefighting lifts under previous standards, were not firefighting lifts under the standards which pertained at the time of the FRAs.
I'm confused on what you just said, sorry.
Well, at the time you did your FRAs, did the prevailing standards for firefighting lifts require firefighting lifts to have trapdoors?
The standard would have done, but whether the lifts installed in the building had them they were to a different.
I think all that Mr. Millett's asking you is to simply tell us whether the lifts as you saw them when you started doing the FRAs were firefighting lifts and in accordance with current standards, i.e. 2010 or thereabout standards. And I think what you're telling us is that they were firefighting lifts as defined in the standards that had been applicable when they were installed, probably.
Correct, yes.
But were no longer in accordance with current 2010 standards for firefighting lifts.
That is correct, yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
And therefore,
thank you, sir.
Is that the reason why you disagree with Mr. Todd?
Yes.
I see. So just to be clear, you say, do you, that Mr. Todd is wrong to say that the absence of trapdoors presented you with a telltale sign that the lifts were not firefighting lifts, because at the time they were installed, those would not have been a telltale sign at all?
Correct.
I follow. Now, can we go to your first statement, paragraph 125, page 44, CST 403063, page 44. And you refer to email correspondence with Robin Cahalan, the senior lift engineer at the TMO, and you've exhibited it. So that's where you exhibit it. Let's go to the correspondence. CST 403080. Page 1, foot of the page, so bottom of the screen, please. That's CST 403080, page 1, foot of page. Yes. Email from Robin Cahalan to Janice Ray, 28th February 2011. Subject, firefighting / evacuation lifts. As recently discussed, standards on firefighting / evacuation lifts, which are not retrospect, have become a lot clearer over the last year. None of the TMO lifts are firefighting or evacuation lifts. The TMO stock do have some of the requirements, but the cost to meet the recommended standards would prevent us upgrading our lifts. And then Janice Ray forwards this on to you in the middle of the page. Can you see that?
Yes.
On the 28th of February, same day, 2011. And you come back to her. Can we just go up, scroll up a little bit, please? Also on the 28th of February. Hi, Janice. As far as I know, the requirements for a firefighting lift / evacuation lift did not change in the March 2010 edition of the building regs. Next time I'm in the hub, could we sit down with Robin, as he might have a different information than me. Does he have copies of the information he is talking about, he could forward to me? And then Janice Ray says at the very top, I'll ask him. Did you ever meet Robin Cahalan to find out what he meant?
Yes.
At that meeting, did he give you any reassurance that the lifts did in fact meet the requirements?
Yes.
What did he say?
Enough information to make sure they met the requirements. And
Right. But do you recall in what respect he gave you the reassurance that you were after?
they had dedicated power supplies. It was everything apart from virtually the lift hatch.
Right. You see, he says that none of the TMO lifts are firefighting or evacuation lifts.
Yes, because I think the conversation, this is a long time ago, but the conversation from memory was along, do they have a complete secondary power supply?
Mm. So at that meeting, did Mr. Cahalan change his mind?
I think we accepted that they met the standard of the previous document, which is dedicated power supply.
Did you double check whether Mr. Cahalan was right, that none of the TMO lifts are firefighting lifts, as he says in his email?
I came away and kept it into the document, so my understanding would be, apart from the items that I put into the document, they were firefighting lifts to our standard.
Right. So do I take it from that they were almost firefighting lifts, but not completely?
Can you have that?
Well,
sorry.
That's the question.
Well, they met the standard at time of installation.
You see, Mr. Cahalan says that standards which are not retrospective have become clearer. None of the TMO lifts are firefighting or evacuation lifts. And you tell Janice Ray that the requirements for a firefighting lift didn't change, and then you have a discussion. Did you discover anything which led you to think that, in fact, although the firefighting lifts were no longer firefighting lifts in accordance with current standards, they had been firefighting lifts in accordance with the standards that applied when they were installed?
Yes. And
what was that?
My comment here is the building, because there was a new edition of building regulations came out in 2010. Looking at this, the changes to the building regulations in 2010, maybe that's what we were talking about, because that's what I say. There is no, as far as I know, the requirements for firefighting lift evacuationists did not change in the March 10 edition of building regs.
Correct. And therefore, why did you think that why did you you understand that, in fact, Mr. Cahalan's initial statement that none of the TMO lifts are firefighting was wrong.
Because is there something in the building regs further down the page, or there was a telephone conversation? This is 2011, so the previous email was 2010. We clarified the lifts to the TMO stock in the letter, my letter to Janice Ray before I undertook a risk assessment. So this is additional. So something must have come out in 2000 and late 10, early 11. The only thing that could have changed then was the building regulations edition, and we then went through that. That's what my assumption, and to the best of my knowledge, what I can answer here.
Well, I think the story continues. Let's go on. Can we go to your first witness statement again, please? CST 403063 at page 44. And let's look together at paragraph 125. In the second line of the paragraph, you say, however, as the lifts were later listed to be firefighting lifts in the summary document provided to me in 2012, I understood this to mean that the KCTMO had satisfied themselves that these were firefighting lifts. I would have expected the lifts to be firefighting lifts as I understood that they were installed in 2005, at which time all new lifts installed in high-rise buildings were required to be firefighting lifts and would have had to comply with EN 81 in order for them to be accepted, again by building control. That's what you say there.
Correct.
Now, the email that you're referring to, you refer to an email there. That is 6th of June 2012. You referred to it in the previous paragraph, in fact. Can we look at the list, which is at CST 403094? Also referred to in paragraph 124. But let's look at the list. It's an email from Janice Ray to Nick Cummery of the LFB. If we look at the second email down there, you can see it. 29th of May 2012. She, in paragraph 3, says this. In discussions with your predecessors, we clarified that many of our lifts meet the majority, but not all of the criteria for firefighting lifts. For example, we do not install a trapdoor, hatch in the roof of the car, etc. It was agreed that we would clarify the criteria that our firefighting lifts do meet, and I have attached an email to the then Borough Commander Brian Dean setting out these criteria. Additionally, I attached a list of the blocks where these lifts are located, and you will see this includes Trellick Tower. You see that? Now,
yes.
Pick up the words, for example, we do not install a trapdoor, hatch in the roof of the car, etc. You then get this email on the 6th of June, if you look at the top of the screen. You can't see it at the moment. It will come to you in a second. There it is. Janice Ray sends it to you on the 6th of June. Carl, hope you had a good holiday and thanks for the Anchor House FRA. For info, here is my response to the LFB. Nick phoned on Thursday to say he and Colette and an operational colleague were visiting Trellick the following day, so I met them there. It seemed to go okay, but Colette was carrying out her audit, so we'll no doubt get something in writing as a follow-up. And there's nothing in the text of the email there I want to ask you about, but it's quite clear from this that you would have read. Can we proceed on the basis that you would have read Janice Ray's email to Nicholas Comrie below it?
Correct.
And you would have read paragraph 3?
Yes.
So you would have seen that she said, for example, we do not install a trapdoor, hatch in the roof of the car, etc. And by using the word etc., she was clearly indicating, wasn't she, to your understanding, that there were other features that did not meet the criteria for firefighting lifts, yes?
But she doesn't list them.
No, she doesn't.
Right.
So that leads to the question, having read this email, did you think to follow up with Janice Ray and ask her what other features there were, in addition to the absence of a trapdoor or hatch in the roof of the car, that meant that the criteria for a firefighting lift was not met?
Unless you pointed out the word etc. there, I would have not even looked. I would have said, we do not install a trapdoor.
Right, so you didn't notice the etc., is that
No.
right?
Yeah.
I see. You didn't ask her then, in what other ways the lifts don't meet the requirements of a firefighting lift?
But it then goes on to say, we agree that we would clarify the criteria that our firefighting lifts do meet, and I was aware of that anyway.
Yes. Again, it was obvious from what she was telling the LFB that the lifts meet some, perhaps most, of the criteria to qualify as a firefighting lift, but not all of them.
Correct.
Yes. And therefore, my question is, how could you have understood that, as you say in your statement, that the lifts were firefighting lifts if they were missing even just the trapdoor?
Because the definition of a firefighting lift is a lift that can be controlled and used by the fire service.
But you must have realised from this email that at the time of this email that was not good enough. There's no sense in this email, is there, from Janice Ray, to tell the LFB that, in fact, they could be regarded as firefighting lifts because they satisfied the standards prevailing at the time of installation. That would have been a simple enough thing to say, but she doesn't, does she?
Well, you'd have to ask her why she didn't say that.
No, but I'm asking you because you received it, and so clearly it was obvious to you at the time, wasn't it, that the absence of a trapdoor in the roof of the car was relevant for the definition as at May or June 2012.
But I put this in the risk assessment, so I knew this anyway.
No, but you're getting ahead of the question. Do you accept that the absence of a trapdoor was a relevant consideration when defining the lifts, even in May 2012, June 2012?
Depending to which standard that they were installed at time of installation.
Let's look at paragraph 125 of your first statement again. This is CST 403063, page 44, we've just been on. You go on to say in that paragraph, and I've read it all to you, but I'll just pick it up with you again. I would have expected the lifts to be firefighting lifts, as I understood that they were installed in 2005, at which time all new lifts installed in high-rise buildings were required to be firefighting lifts and would have had to comply with EN 81 in order for them to be accepted, again, by building control. Did you actually make that assumption at the time? When I say at the time of the exchange in May 2012 that we've just been looking at?
Because yes, I agree with that, your statement, because the lifts were installed in 2005.
Yes, and my question is, did you make the assumption at the time that because they were installed in 2005, it didn't matter for the purposes of defining them as firefighting lifts that they didn't have a trapdoor?
Yes.
Right. Did you actually ever seek confirmation that these lifts had been signed off by building control?
The answer is probably no.
Why is that?
Because this would have been 6 years before I undertook a risk assessment in late 2010.
You never asked for the certificate or the sign-off by building control, simple matter of asking for a document?
Probably not, no.
Did you actually ever ask the question, did these lifts qualify as firefighting lifts at the time of installation?
I would expect them to, but did I ask for it in writing? No.
Right. Did you ever ask for any documents from the lift manufacturers or installers that they were firefighting lifts and therefore in compliance with EN 81?
They wouldn't be in compliance with EN 81.
No.
Because EN 81 wouldn't be applicable to this building.
Was it not applicable in 2005 when
No.
they were installed? I thought it was dated 2003.
It is, but EN 81 for firefighting lifts is only for new builds. It's not for existing buildings or refurbishments.
Right. Asking the question a slightly different way, did you ever ask to see any documents from the lift manufacturers or installers as to whether they were firefighting lifts, properly so called, as at the date of sale or installation?
No.
Why is that?
This was, well, the documentation from the TMO said they were firefighting lifts. I would not go back and ask for something that was 6-7 years old at the time when I was there.
Would you accept that, in essence, your repeated reference to the lifts as firefighting or evacuation lifts was based really only on your assumption that they should have been?
No, they met the definition of a firefighting and evacuation lift as in building control, other LGA guidance, PAT 79, and numerous other documents.
Notwithstanding the absence of at least the three features we've identified.
Because they met the criteria.
Now, moving on, can we look, please, at
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, Mr.
Sorry, sir.
It seems to me that what we are debating is whether it is appropriate to refer to a lift as a firefighting lift as of the time when you are writing your report, because it might be said that your FRA, by describing the lift as a firefighting lift, is suggesting that it is a firefighting lift by the current standards.
I see where you're coming from. So the definition of a firefighting lift given in the sleeping guide, PAS, building regulations is a lift that can be controlled by the fire service. That's the definition of a firefighting lift that I was using. I did not use the definition a firefighting lift 2, where in other cases, so for instance, a fire alarm system within the dwellings, I would put down 2 BS 5839 Part 6. This is the definition used here is the definition used in building regulations for a firefighting lift, which is a lift that can be controlled by the fire service.
Without reference to the particular standards for what we've been calling firefighting lifts.
Yes, because that standard EN 81 only came in 2003, and that is for new buildings only.
So when we see you refer to firefighting lifts, we ought to understand you to be using that term in a relatively limited sense.
As the definition given in all the guidance documents.
Right. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Lee.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. In the light of that exchange, I might be able to take this a little bit more quickly, but let's see how we go. CST 6013, please. This is an email to you from Matt Smith of Max Fordham on the 24th of January 2014. Halfway down your screen. Morning, Carl. It was good to meet you yesterday. It would have been useful to have known about your existence at an earlier stage. And then if we turn the page, please, to page 2, first bullet point, we see that you are asked the question. I should just explain what this looks like, this email. The text of the email is in black with some questions in bold or topics, and you respond in red. And tell me if that's wrong.
It seems to be correct, yes.
Yes. Now, at the top of page 2, you say, he says or asks, both lifts within Grenfell are FF, evac lifts. These are not up to current standards due to the lack of an escape hatch. And you say, correct. Both lifts are fully functional FF evac, or ECAV, you put, lifts. The hatch item is not relevant. See information below as well.
Yes.
What did you mean when you said the hatch item was not relevant?
Because it wouldn't be to that standard. That's the escape hatch was to the EN standard when that came in. These lifts were to an older standard as at time of installation.
And then on page 2, in the third paragraph from the end, it says, also, if the lifts are firefighting lifts, then there should be secure dual supplies to them. This is not shown on the schematics. And your response to that is, in the red text, sorry, I cannot answer any of the above questions, including that one, but below is the information from the TMO lift register. And then you set that out on page 3.
Yes.
And then on page 3, you go on to say, as these are newly refurbished installed lifts, I can only assume that they comply with all the electrical requirements of an FF evac lift. Otherwise, the maintenance / installation company would have raised this item at the time of the work being undertaken. Now, we can see in that email that that you're being told that the schematics don't show that there was a secondary power supply. So your assumption that they must be firefighting lifts was clearly wrong, wasn't it? Well, why not?
Because they have a dedicated power supply to the standard that was required at the time of installation.
But is this another example of them being compliant at the time but not any longer with the definition of firefighting lifts?
Yes. So
now we've got two, have we? We've got the escape hatch and we've got the power supply.
No, the dedicated power supply is a requirement that is there. You do not, I think even for the newer standard, you can have 2 power supplies from the same substation. It doesn't have to be a completely separate. It has, as long as it's dedicated and there. But the standard, it was applicable to the standard at the time.
I think we are agreeing with me. Mr. Smith is identifying the fact that there should be secure dual supplies to the lift to make them a firefighting lift at the time. And you're saying you assume that they comply with the electrical requirements of a firefighting lift. Otherwise, that would have been raised at the time of installation.
Yes.
So you're working on the assumption that they complied with the requirements at the time.
Yes.
Yes. So you didn't even know whether or not the secure dual supplies were actually in place at the time.
Dual supplies, no.
Dual supplies, no. So that's a second category of potential disqualification for these lifts as firefighting lifts, even by the in fact by the standards of the time of installation.
No, because it's dedicated power supply at time of installation.
Right, but we now become a dual supply. All right, well, leaving aside the time of installation, by the time of your fire risk assessment, certainly from 2012, am I right in thinking it's a second category of potential difference? You've got hatch and you've got dual power supply now.
But the EN standard would only apply to new buildings.
Yeah, I understand that. But
And lifts, it's not retrospective. So if there was only a dedicated power supply and it was accepted by building control at 2005, that, in my view, would sign off an acceptance that dedicated supply is sufficient.
at the time,
Yes.
but no longer by 2012.
But they were, my comment there, this would have been raised by the maintenance installation company at the time of installation or at 2005.
Right. And then if we go back to your first statement, please, CST 403063, page 44, paragraph 127, you say there, and I think we need to look, that's it. In the last line, you say, Exover's fire strategy document of November 2013, which also described them as firefighting lifts. Are you saying that you relied on Exover's outline fire safety strategy for Grenfell Tower at the time to support your own conclusion about the definition of the lifts?
No, just an observation that.
Is that an observation you make when doing your statement?
Yes.
I see. So that's not evidence of what happened at the time.
That's an observation.
Right. I was going to ask you how you got hold of the of Exover's fire strategy document, but presumably that was in disclosure in the inquiry.
No, I believe I had Exnova's fire strategy given to me sometime by someone at TMO. I'm going to say Paul Dunkerton.
Right. And was that the outline fire safety strategy you exhibit, namely the one from November 2013 or an earlier one from 2012?
No, I'm going to say what you just said, the outline.
I see. Do you remember the circumstances in which he gave it to you?
Was I not to do with the Ledbetter and asking me to whether I would help Ledbetter as part of the construction?
Well, I mean, you tell
Sorry,
me.
yes, that's my answer.
Right.
Sorry, sir.
I think you're in a better position to answer questions than I am. I'm in the position to ask them.
Sorry, sir.
I hope so. Yes. If we go to your 29th of December 2010 FRA, please. Which is no. Well, perhaps I'll come back to that. Perhaps I'll come back to that later. Would you agree that, in fact, given the qualifications that we've been talking about and the fact that by 2012 the standards were different, putting it neutrally, that it would have been much better had you referred to these lifts as firemen's lifts in your FRAs rather than firefighting lifts.
No, because there's no definition for firemen's lifts in any of the documents.
The reason I suggest this is because by calling them firefighting lifts, you are at least potentially leading the reader to think that they were compliant with standards prevailing at the time of your FRA rather than the time of the installation.
No, sir, because the use of the word definition firefighting lifts is a direct lift from building regulations and all the other documents as their definitions of a lift in a building called a firefighting lift.
Did you agree with Mr. Cahalan in the email I showed you earlier that in fact there are three categories of lift: fireman's lift, firefighting lift and evacuation lift?
Yes.
And therefore by calling them firefighting stroke evacuation lifts that was liable to cause confusion?
No, I disagree.
And to indicate quite wrongly that they had the requisite features to be able to be used for firefighting and evacuation purposes.
I disagree because they are the definitions in all those documents.
Why did you never say in any of your FRAs that at the time of the installation these conformed with the definition of firefighting lifts but no longer do?
Because I used if they would have been up to date brand new lifts, I would have put firefighting lifts to BSE 8271, whatever the standard is.
I'm sorry, that's not an answer to my question. Why did you never simply say, when they were installed, they conformed to the definition of firefighting lifts, but they no longer do?
Because that is not the way I understand it. They conform to, at time of installation and retrospective, or if newer standards come out, it's not retrospective to upgrade the lift to the higher standard of today.
Can I ask you to look, please, at CTA 6011, page 84. What I'm going to show you is Mr. Colin Todd's conclusion on this, on that page at paragraph 8.60. And on page 84, if you go there, 8.60, he says, however, it is clear to me that while it might have been reasonable for Mr. Stokes to accept the original information agreed between Salvus and the TMO, in which, as discussed in paragraph 4.34 above, he had no involvement, Mr. Stokes did appear to lack knowledge in the standards for lifts designed for use by the Fire and Rescue Service, both modern and historical. Do you agree with that?
No.
Now, I want to turn in the 10 minutes we have until 4:30 to start on a new topic, or newish topic, the use of FRAs and effect on disabled person evacuation strategy. Can we go back to the same page of your first witness statement, CST 403063, page 44, and go to paragraph 126. You say there, from the information available to me and from any observations when inspecting the tower, it seemed that these lifts had these features except for the fact that there was no escape hatch in the top of the lift car. This was noted in section 19 of the 2014 FRA and subsequently in my April and June 2016 FRAs. Would you agree that in your 2014 and 2016 FRAs there are a number of places where you do not provide the caveat that the lifts do not have an escape hatch or that they do not meet the requirements of a firefighting or evacuation lift?
Sorry, for this building?
For this building, yes, 2014 FRAs for Grenfell Tower and the two 2016 FRAs. Do you accept that as a general proposition, there are a number of places in those FRAs where you don't provide the caveat that there is no escape hatch or that it doesn't meet the requirements of a firefighting or evacuation lift?
No, sorry, I don't understand the question.
You don't understand. Well, it's probably best to get to it by way of some examples. Can we start with the 2014 FRA, please? CST 403157. Page 5. I'm using this as an example, but take it from me that it's the same across both of the 2016 FRAs as well. Page 5, under use and layout of the building, at the top of your screen, if we look about 3/4 of the way down the box of text there, it says, on the ground floor level there is an electrical substation, the building's electrical room and the bin room. And then it says, the 2 lifts in this building service all the residential floor levels and both are evacuation stroke firefighting lifts, so can be used for disabled evacuation if needed. Do you agree? No mention there of the absence of a trapdoor in the roof.
Correct, because this is the definition at the top is use and lay of the building. That information would come further in the document under firefighting lifts.
Page 14, plant and fixed equipment, which is section 5.
Yes.
Comments or observation about lifts and lift motor room. And then towards the bottom of the text box, it says in the second but last line, both lifts installed in this building are firefighting evacuation lifts according to the TMO's documentation. And then over the page, these fighting evacuation lifts have their own independent dedicated power supply and firefighters control switch. Again, no mention there of the absence of a trapdoor in the ceiling.
Correct, because it's further carried on further down in item 18 or 19, where there is the whole section on firefighting lifts.
Page 21, section 13, disabled persons. We've seen this before.
Yes.
But we didn't look at this part because this was one of the parts you said was tailor-made. 3/4 of the way down the text box, both of the lifts in this building are firefighter stroke evacuation lifts and could be used as part of the evacuation strategy for disabled persons. But if these lifts were used, this would be under the control of the fire service if they were in attendance. No mention there of the absence of an escape hatch.
Correct, because it's mentioned further on under the part dedicated to firefighting lifts.
But I think I've shown you that in all of the areas of the FRA which detail the evacuation strategy for disabled persons, you don't provide any caveat that, in fact, these are not firefighting evacuation lifts under present standards by virtue of the absence of a trapdoor in the ceiling.
Correct, because disabled people wouldn't be using the trapdoor in the ceiling. If you carry on further down the document, please, under the heading for firefighting lifts, it will cover it in there.
Mr. Todd says in his report that you made an incorrect assumption that these lifts could be used for the purposes of firefighting or evacuation. That's we can see it if you like. Do you agree with him?
No.
Why is that?
Because under the definition of a firefighting lift and an evacuation lift, these lifts could be used for both those purposes.
Do you accept that your statement that these were firefighting or stroke evacuation lifts would have misled the reader of this document who wanted to know the evacuation strategy for disabled persons in Grenfell Tower?
No.
You don't. And you don't accept, I imagine, also that your statements posed a risk to life to anyone who sought to use them in that way?
No.
Now, can we go to LFB 50154, please? This is the letter of the 17th of February 2014 to all heads of housing in all London boroughs and ALMOs and social housing landlords. The topic is advice on smoke ventilation systems and maintenance of lifts for fire service use in residential blocks of flats. You see that? Did you ever see a copy of this letter?
It doesn't look familiar.
Doesn't look familiar. Were you familiar with the guidance that Steve Turek, who was the author of this letter, issued with it, or within it, I should say?
What guidance?
Well, it's a fair question. Let me just show you. If you turn, please, to page 2. well, page 3, in fact, is where it starts. Maintenance for lifts for fire service use. There's a long page of guidance there about maintenance of lifts for fire service use in housing stock above 18 metres in height. Do you remember ever seeing this?
This looks like a direct lift in 9999.
Well, that's certainly referred to. You're right. Let's just look and see what it says under this section. If we start with the 4th paragraph here, it says, where it has been identified that a fireman's, quotes, lift, as opposed to a firefighting lift, is installed within a building, then we would request that the responsible person liaises with the relevant London Fire Brigade local safety regulation team to advise them of the premises, address and style of lift present in accordance with sharing of information detailed in Article 13.3c of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order of 2005. This allows any necessary pre-planning to be undertaken in consideration of a familiarisation visit to the premises by our crews. And then he goes on, the type and functionality of lift for fire service use should also be included in the fire risk assessment for the building, and consideration given to the potential impact that a fireman's, quotes, lift may have on any fire incident that may occur on the upper floors of a high-rise building. If crews are not able to use the lift beyond the initial stages of an incident, then the potential effect of this on safety of residents must be considered and recorded within the fire risk assessment. Now, even if you weren't aware of this letter at the time, Mr. Stokes, do you agree that the reason for identifying correctly whether there is a fireman's lift or a firefighting lift in a building is, first of all, to allow for pre-planning to be undertaken by the crews?
Correct.
Yes. And also to consider and record the potential effect on the safety of residents if the crews are not able to use the lift beyond the initial stages of the incident?
Correct.
Yes. So do you agree that by your not correctly identifying and advising the TMO that the lifts were only firemen's lifts, as opposed to firefighting lifts by current standards, that meant that the requisite consideration and planning as set out in Steve Chirick's letter could not be undertaken?
I disagree.
Why do you disagree?
Because where there were firemen's lifts in buildings, I identified those, and they were in older buildings that the TMO had and were not firefighting lifts.
So let's go back then to the 2014 FRA at CST 403157 and look at page 26. This is where you refer to the absence of the hatch. 26. It's a long piece of text, but if you look, it's about a quarter of the way down. Both the lifts in this building, do you see that?
Yes.
Are firefighting, evacuation stroke firefighting lifts. And I apologise, I should have shown you this, the page before, which is the section this sits under, which is section 19, fixed fire systems and equipment. And if you flip back, please, to page 25, you'll see it. Second item there, evacuation stroke firefighting lift. So you've identified it clearly there with a tick yes. And if we go to page 26, we'll see the qualification that you...
Sorry, can I just...
Yes, of course.
So the tick...
Go back to page 20, sorry. If you go back to page 25, please, in this document.
So the type of systems in this building, dry rising main, evacuation, automatic opening vent and hose reels, tick, those are the systems in that building. So those would change depending on what was in each building. So that is not a standard, that is, you add those in. So the tick in this box, so the question is type of system in this building, those four, and they are in that building.
Well, you're saying that this building has an evacuation stroke
Yes.
firefighting lifts in it.
Yes, so I'm just explaining that the number of items can change in there depending on which building you're in.
No, I understand that. But my suggestion to you was that here is a simple and unqualified tick
Yes.
against the existence of firefighting lifts in Grenfell Tower.
Yes.
Yes, 2014. Now, let's go to the text that I wanted to show you. If we go to page 26, please. a quarter of the way down, it says, both the lifts in this building are evacuation stroke firefighting lifts. The lifts have the standard firefighter override controls fitted so that the fire and rescue service can take control of these lifts and use them as they see fit to do so. In the event of an emergency, please see significant finding sheets regarding the relocation of these lifts. And then you can skip the next few lines and then pick it up just below that, where it says the power supplies to each lift are as required for a firefighter evacuation lift, along with all other requirements for weight and size, etc., but there is no roof hatch in the lifts. Well, it wasn't correct, was it, that the power supplies to each lift are as required for a firefighter evacuation lift, because there was no dual supply.
But there's a dedicated supply.
Yes, but there was no dual supply, was there?
There is no dual supply, correct, because they are not to that standard.
Doesn't say that, though, does it? It doesn't say the power supplies to each lift are as was required at the time of installation for a firefighter lift, does it?
It does not, but
No.
it does not say that these are power supplies to a lift to current standards either.
No, but do you agree with me, just looking at it, that it gives the impression that the power supplies to each lift are as required as at 2014 for a firefighter stroke evacuation lift as at 2014?
No, it's, from what I read there, the power supply for each is as required for a firefighter evacuation lift.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. I think we'll stop there for the day, Mr. Stokes. Again, I'm going to have to ask you to come back and deal with some more questions tomorrow.
Sir.
And we'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow, please. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it over the break.
Okay.
All right?
Thank
you
you,
very much. Good. You'd like to go with the usher then, please. Right. Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please.